Good morning, Pastor Lydia here, joining you for Inside the Text today on Wednesday, July 16th. This day we are going to dive into the story that immediately follows last week's story from the Gospel of Luke chapter 10. Last week's was the Good Samaritan, and this week's is the story of the sisters Mary and Martha in the Gospel of Luke. Before we get started, however, I invite you to take a moment to center yourself in this space, to be open to the Spirit of God and where it is calling and leading you, and what is rising or comes to the surface in your body, in your mind, and in your spirit during our time together in this dive into a very short but also well-known story from Luke's Gospel. So in this moment, I invite you to take a deep breath, light a candle if you would like, knowing that Christ's presence is among us always, but a candle is a beautiful symbol of that presence. And be open to what God's Spirit is stirring within you. Our story today comes from the Gospel of Luke, as I mentioned, from chapter 10, and it follows immediately after the story of the Good Samaritan, which was last Sunday's Gospel text. And so it is still in chapter 10, beginning with verse 38, and we read verses 38 through 42. So again, it's not a very long story, but it is well known. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." Now, this story also comes with a lot of baggage, especially for women or people who identify as women. We are often asked or told, are we a Mary? Are we a Martha? You have to be one or the other. You're not both. Domestic hospitality seems to be looked down on. Jesus is elevating Mary over Martha. There's a push and a pull between the sisters. There's disagreement and argument and bitterness between the sisters. For centuries, interpreters and church scholars and theologians and the church itself have pitted these two sisters against each other as opposing forces of what is right and what is wrong, and one is better than the other, one is higher or more elevated, one is preferred by God, by Jesus, over the other. But I don't think that's true. I think we miss a greater truth about what Jesus is saying here for the sisters, not just for Martha, and for anyone else who is present, though we don't know explicitly that anyone else is present in this space, because it does say at the very beginning that they, meaning I would assume Jesus and the disciples and anyone else following, went on their way, and he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. It doesn't say explicitly that she welcomed the whole group. It does say explicitly that she welcomed Jesus into her home. So we know for certain that Mary, Martha, and Jesus were in this space. The probability and possibility that there were others present is very real, but we do not know for certain because that is not what the text explicitly says. We can read between the lines a little bit there. But anyway, regardless, Martha has welcomed Jesus into her home. That's a big deal. It's pretty beautiful hospitality, and is a beautiful act of service that she is inviting this man who is not related to her into her home, especially in first century Palestine. That was a big deal. And it's an act of service. And we've just finished hearing the parable of the Good Samaritan, in which a Samaritan, the surprise hero, provides acts of service to a stranger and cares for this stranger in need and is a neighbor. Throughout the whole Gospel of Luke, one of the crucial elements to being a disciple of Christ is serving, is being a servant, is caring for. Later on in the Gospel, when the disciples are arguing about who is going to be the greatest among them, and Jesus says, well, the greatest among all people will be those who serve others. Luke is very much about disciples serving and caring for those in need, those that are outcast, those that are on the margins, those who are viewed as less than in society. And yet, Jesus seems to scold or rebuff Martha when she asks if he cares that Mary has left her to do all of this serving work, all of this hospitality work, and is just sitting listening to him. And, he says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it won't be taken from her. Great. That is often interpreted as Jesus choosing or elevating Mary above Martha, and elevating Mary's choice of sitting and learning and listening above Martha's domestication and her tasks of service and hospitality and homemaking and care and providing. But nowhere does Jesus rebuff or rebuke her service. And he doesn't really scold either. What he addresses is her worry and distraction, her anxiety, and her expectation and understanding of what hospitality and service and faith looks like or should present. Her radical acceptance and ability to follow Jesus manifests in acts of service. Mary's manifests in acts of listening, or maybe, as we would use in phrases of love language, quality time. She's sitting and she's listening. She's spending time with Christ. And that isn't to say that Martha isn't spending time with Christ, but that her faith manifests differently, and neither is better or worse, but Martha is preoccupied with this understanding that all expressions of faith should look like hers. And something that we have lost over the centuries, I just kicked something under my desk. Something we've lost over the centuries is this beautiful legend about these two sisters. And I'm going to leave you with this story of this legend today, and I want you to take it with you and really ponder and puzzle it out. Because most of us don't know this story, especially in the Lutheran Church here in the United States, particularly because we don't have deep relationships with the saints. But Martha is considered a saint. She's actually Saint Martha the Dragon Slayer. And that's not at all what we would necessarily picture when we've been hammered over the head with this image of Martha as this domestic, homebody in the kitchen, cooking and preparing and serving. We don't picture a dragon slayer. However, the medieval church has this legend that manifested or came about in France. And the legend goes that both Mary and Martha traveled to France after Christ's resurrection and ascension. They traveled to France to share their faith and the gospel message. And Martha came across a village that was plagued by a vicious and powerful dragon. And she slayed the dragon. Now, there are lots of interpretations that say, this dragon is a metaphor for, other pagan um, religions and cultural uh, structures of society in that village, or the dragon is like the sin and the darkness in the world, and she converted the whole town to Christianity and saved them, and so she's the dragon slayer. And whatever truth or fiction there may be in this legend, Martha remains a dragon slayer, and Saint Martha the Dragon Slayer. And there's these wild depictions in medieval art of this woman slaying / taming a dragon. Sometimes she's actively slaying it. She's got like a sword and she's fighting it. Sometimes she's almost appears to be like stroking or petting its head, like she's taming the dragon. Regardless, this is a really powerful image for someone who has, in recent church history, been relegated to the kitchen. Second, don't forget that in this legend, Mary also travels to France, and instead of slaying a dragon in a small town, she creates a monastery. She starts and builds a monastery. The point being that the medieval church upheld both of these sisters and held fervently to the truth that faith requires service and word and service. That faith manifests through hearing and processing and learning and study of the word, as well as in acts of service and care and hospitality. And that in order to be disciples of Christ, we have to embrace both. These sisters are upheld in the medieval church as paragons of both, and that we cannot have one without the other. They must go hand in hand. And we've lost that understanding of these two sisters over the centuries, at least, again, in much more westernized and United States Christianity. We have kind of relegated both of them to one sitting at Jesus's feet and just simply listening and not being active in that learning, other than just hearing it, and one just being relegated to the kitchen and acts of serving and preparing food for men. That's not what this story is about. And so today I will leave you with this beautiful story of Saint Martha the Dragon Slayer, and Mary, the founder of a monastery in France. And let that kind of sit and percolate for you, and hope that you can join us this coming Sunday as we delve deeper into an understanding that this story is maybe sharing with us that our faith and call to follow Christ requires both service and learning, word and service. Have a great day.